Tom Bauer dropped those 7 words. Suddenly everything flipped, but hardly how anyone imagined. Because this was never just about Meghan. It was about something far deeper, far quieter, and far more unbelievably explosive. Something that Harry himself may have never fully realized until it was already far too late.
Privacy every hour of the day. And I do think the use of the children is quite reprehensible.
Well, and Harry introducing his children to England. It ain't going to be like that. And there's a long way to go before...
Our dream girl. Happy 5th birthday, Lily. The As Ever founder captioned her post alongside a white heart emoji.
Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor, more specifically her name, is already making headlines. With conflict...
But the monarch and King Charles has only met Lily once, who is named after Queen Elizabeth's childhood nickname.
That line, "I don't mind Harry, it's Meghan I'm after." It didn't simply land, it absolutely exploded. The studio went silent. The host panicked. The internet erupted. But beneath all that chaos, something far bigger was quietly unfolding. Something nobody dared to say aloud. Because Bauer was no longer aiming at Meghan. He was looking straight through her toward a story that had already shifted attention to someone else entirely. A child, a name, a detail so tiny, so fragile that almost nobody questioned it at first. And that's exactly why it slipped through. Lilibet, not merely a name, not merely a tribute, not merely a sentimental gesture whispered into the world like a gentle royal echo. No, this felt entirely different. Something deliberate, something positioned with remarkable precision. Because the instant that name was revealed, something reportedly didn't sit right behind palace walls. Not publicly, never publicly, but privately. The response wasn't warmth. It wasn't nostalgia. It was shock, followed by confusion, and finally growing suspicion.
The year since the media baron Robert Maxwell fell to his death off the back of his yacht, Lady Giselle.
Because that name wasn't just another name. It was protected, guarded, and reserved for an entire lifetime. Then suddenly, it was used in a way nobody had ever witnessed before. But here's where everything gets suspicious. While the public saw pure emotion, insiders noticed perfect timing. Think about it. Step back for one moment and connect the
authorized biographies, including the recently re-released publication about one of Britain's most...
That wasn't coincidence. That was strategy. And Bauer spotted it instantly because by the time he walked into that studio, the groundwork had already been finished. The sources, the documents, the contradictions, they were no longer just theories. They had become patterns. Patterns repeating again and again in ways that refused to match the public story everyone had been sold. And that's exactly where things turned uncomfortable. Because once you notice the pattern, there's no pretending you didn't. The name, the timing, the messaging, every piece moving in flawless sync, it was almost too perfect. Maximum visibility, maximum emotional impact. And right in the middle of everything sat the very same name that had already sparked endless questions. Then the pace suddenly exploded. The meeting with the Queen was captured, documented, and broadcast across the world. Only months later, those same images transformed into something entirely different. They no longer looked like ordinary memories. They became the final visual connection, carefully framed, preserved, and controlled by the very people who had chosen to walk away. Suddenly, what seemed like a simple visit started looking far more strategic when viewed through the same lens Bauer had already introduced. Then came the quiet shift in titles. No dramatic announcement, no emotional speech, no grand celebration, just calm acceptance. Clean, simple, unquestioned acceptance of something that had previously been presented as deeply important, even controversial. That contrast, the enormous gap between loud earlier complaints and the near-total silence surrounding the outcome, didn't escape attention because patterns never appear only once. They repeat. And once they repeat, they begin telling their own story. Then came the christening. That's when the contradictions stopped hiding because everything about it moved in the complete opposite direction from what the public narrative had conditioned everyone to expect. No historic location, no institutional presence, no visible connection to the very establishment that had just granted status. Instead came distance, privacy, and separation. On its own, that decision could seem completely understandable. But placed inside the sequence Bauer had already outlined, it stopped standing alone. It became another piece of the very same structure, a structure driven by one consistent formula. Take whatever strengthens the narrative, avoid whatever demands participation, then repeat the cycle. That's the part nobody says aloud, yet once you notice it, it's almost impossible to ignore. Because this was never about one decision or even one isolated moment. It was about alignment. Every decision lining up with a version of events that needed to stay intact, needed to remain emotionally compelling, even while the details underneath slowly shifted. Then the silence returned. This time it sounded even louder. Because once Bauer's work entered public view, once those sequences were placed side by side, people expected more than reactions. They expected corrections. They expected clarification. They expected pushback. Instead, they got absolutely nothing. Not the silence that comes from dismissing rumors, but the silence that feels carefully calculated. Because responding opens doors. It invites deeper scrutiny. It forces hidden details into the spotlight, details that may not fit the narrative quite so neatly. So the silence remained. And it didn't come from only one side. It came from both. That's where everything became even more unsettling. When two opposing sides, each with every reason to defend themselves, each equipped with resources, platforms, and legal options, both decide not to engage, not to escalate, not to dismantle what's already circulating, they create a vacuum. That vacuum doesn't bury the story. It makes it even bigger. Now the question isn't what is true. The question becomes why nobody seems willing to challenge it publicly. That's exactly where the story circles back to its beginning. Not the interview, not the headlines, but that single detail that started everything. A name that was never supposed to become public in the first place, suddenly sitting at the heart of a narrative that refuses to settle, refuses to disappear, and keeps dragging every conversation back toward it. Because this was never just about Meghan, and it was never only about Harry. It was about what happens when a story is built so carefully that even the smallest detail begins carrying enormous weight, and what happens when someone starts connecting those details in a way that's almost impossible to unravel.